Hi, I'm Michael Hamby and you're watching Indigo Herbs TV. This is part one of a 5-part series of videos with nutritionist and author David Ash. Enjoy. David, you're sort of perhaps better known as a researcher into sort of fundamental and quantum physics.
Correct.
In fact, let me get this right. Dr. Samantha Lofton, author of Punk Science, considers you to be a leader in the quantum consciousness movement. So what made you turn your attention to nutrition?
Well, I've always been involved in nutrition as well as physics. Right from, when I was a teenager, I was working with my father, both in the field of physics because he was concerned about radioactive fallout, and also in nutrition because he was using nutrition as a way to protect people from fallout. So As a youngster, I was involved in both fields. So I've always done both nutrition and physics.
I see, right, okay, that's very interesting. So much of your most recent work is about sugar, starch, sucrose, the effect of processed food on our well-being. So from a nutritional perspective, is eating starchy, carbohydrate foods, is that the same as eating sugar?
Yes, it is. My background is I was trained in nutrition at Queen Elizabeth College, London University, and my professor was John Yudkin, who wrote the book Pure White and Deadly, and he was the first professor of nutrition at London University. And so the thing is that as far as the body is concerned, sugar is glucose. So when you talk about blood sugar, you're talking about blood glucose levels. Now, when we stir those crystals that we call sugar into a cup of tea, that is actually just one form of sugar. It's called sucrose, which is a combination of glucose and fructose. So the body is really hit with the glucose because it's the glucose that's actively absorbed.
Right.
Now, the other form of glucose that we're all familiar with is starch.
Right.
Now, whereas sucrose is 50% glucose, starch is 100% glucose.
Right.
So when you have a sticky bun, you're eating 100% glucose.
Right.
See.
Right.
When you have honey, you're eating 50% glucose.
Okay.
And glucose is actively absorbed, and although we can't live without glucose, if we have too much glucose, there's a real problem.
I see.
So the actual problem that we're dealing with is a hormone in the body called insulin. And what's happening is that we're all eating too much glucose in the form of sugar and starch.
Right.
Okay? And as we bombard the body with sugar and starch, when you absorb glucose, the blood sugar levels rise and the body produces insulin from the pancreas to bring the blood sugar levels down. Okay? And what happens is that the body tends to react, and I call this sugar shock, to sugar, a bit like, you get a shock with electricity.
Yeah.
Okay? Sugar shock is my parlance for what in the field of nutrition they call glycemic index.
Right.
Glycemic index is the speed at which the glucose is absorbed. And it's rather like the force. It's rather like volts in electricity. Okay? So the volts in electricity give you the shock. Then you get the current in electricity, which is the total amount of electricity. Okay.
Yeah.
And so if you get a low voltage and a high current, which you get in a car battery, okay, although it makes big sparks, it doesn't really give you a shock.
Right.
Whereas you get static.
Yes.
And it gives you a nasty shock, but very low current.
Yeah.
You see. So it's a bit like that with the body, that it's not the amount of glucose, it's the speed at which the glucose is absorbed by the body.
I see.
Which gives the body a shock, which produces the insulin. You see. So this is why I talk about the physics of food, and this is why it's so important that I'm a physicist as well as a nutritionist, because I'm thinking of the physics as well as the chemistry, you see. And in physics, we have a concept which is the surface area to the volume ratio. Now, if you take a mouse, it's got a very high surface area to volume ratio, whereas an elephant has got a very low surface area to volume ratio. In other words, the elephant's got a lot of volume and not much skin compared with that volume. Whereas you take the volume of an elephant and you get far more skin with mice if you stretched all their little mouse skins out. You get the idea.
I do.
So what happens when you absorb starch or sucrose is that the enzymes get at the starch and sucrose and split off the glucose, and then the glucose goes in to the body, is actively absorbed. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason why sugar is such a problem is because it dissolves, it goes into solution, and therefore the enzymes can get to it super quick.
Right.
Okay? Snap off all the glucose, in it goes, so you get a real sugar shock. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, if you eat brown rice, you've got very large particles, which is a small surface to volume ratio.
Right.
So the enzyme nibbles away at the surface, and it's got to push its way around a bit of fibre and a bit of husk there.
I see.
Do you see the idea? Yeah. So it takes time for the glucose to break away.
Right.
So you get, it's like a lot of current. Eating brown rice is a bit like working with a car battery.
Yes.
Okay? So you get a low shock, but a high current. So you get all the carbohydrate you need, but, it's coming in piano, gently, slowly, no problem there, you see. However, we human beings, being clever people, okay, clever individuals, what we've learnt to do is to process food. And the original form of processing, one form of processing is cooking, and another form of processing is grinding. What we've done is we've ground down grains of starch into flour.
Yeah.
First of all into meal, and then into flour. Mm-hmm. Now, if you take a rice grain, quite a big particle, if you take some oatmeal or cornmeal, it's a smaller particle. Okay? But if you take the flour of corn or the flour of wheat or the flour of rice, it's extremely small particle.
Yeah.
So you're getting a very high surface area to volume ratio, and you're not far off a solution.
Right.
You see, so this is the problem. The problem is the processing, the cooking and the processing of food.
Right.
So when we eat a flour like wheat flour or rice corn flour, you see, we get a real sugar shock. Of course, corn syrup's worse because it dissolves. Okay.
I see.
So we have to sort of look at the physics of the way food is working. And what actually happens, to understand the science of this, is that when the body gets a sugar shock, it produces insulin. It floods out the insulin. The insulin drops the blood sugar levels. So actually, you get too little sugar in the blood.
Right.
And so you go in and you eat more sugar or more starch. You have another candy bar, another a bun. And that then spikes the blood insulin again. So the blood insulin is going up and down, up and down, up and down. Okay?
Right.
So this is a real problem. And you're actually producing a toxic state.
Right.
Okay. Now, what is the insulin doing with the sugar? Well, the glucose, the blood glucose. It causes it to go into glycogen, which is the equivalent of starch in the liver. And then in the liver, also, the glycogen is then turned to fat.
I see.
And the fat is being deposited, first of all, as close as possible in the liver. You get fat deposits. In the spaces around the essential organs, you get a lot of fat. And also in the arteries. So the body is trying to deal with this load of sugar. Okay, so it turns it into fat. And then the next thing that's happening is that the constant rise in insulin caused by these sugar shocks is creating an insulin resistance in the cells, which is type 2 diabetes.
I see.
So what we've got at the moment is an epidemic of type 2 diabetes and an epidemic of obesity.
Right.
So the belly fat, for example, you know, the Michelin tire, that is the build-up of fat around the vital organs and a fatty liver. So the liver is becoming sluggish because it's all clogged up with fat and full of glycogen.
Right.
And it never gets a break. The only break the liver gets is at night when we go to sleep.
Yeah.
But from early in the morning till late at night, we're stuffing all the time.
Yeah.
And what we have to understand is that this cycle of taking glucose, driving up the blood sugar levels, okay, insulin dropping the blood sugar levels, so we get hypoglycemic. Okay, so it's hyper to hypo. We get high blood sugar levels to low blood sugar levels. It's a seesaw. It's this
peaks and troughs.
Your peaks and troughs.
Yeah.
This is a disease state. This is a situation that is actually predisposing us to a whole spectrum of diseases, and actually it's a form of addiction. It's an addiction cycle, because when the blood sugar levels go too low, you crave for more sugar or more starch. So you go for bread, you go for a bun, you go for a biscuit, you go for cake.
Yeah.
So there's a new concept that's coming out, which is food addiction. In 2012, I produced my little book, Love Your Liver. And at the same time, the Oxford University Press were publishing a book, the handbook on food addiction.
Right.
So it's this recognition of this addictive cycle.
Yeah.
Okay.